Hi and welcome to Eating Fried Chicken in the Shower bonus episode with me, James Nokise, and my good friend, clinical psychologist Sarb Johal.
Kia ora, James.
Sarb, I want to talk this time about suicide. And I want to ask you, when a suicide happens, how does it affect the community around that person?
Yeah, James, that's really complex, and there's still, huge taboo about how we talk about this, and knowing how people in the family and friends and the wider community experience this. But there's a little bit that we do know, and I thought it might be useful to share that. Often people experience remorse over the lost opportunities with that person, but also a lot of anger as well. Sometimes that anger is directed at the person who took their own life, but also maybe the anger is directed to those who perhaps are perceived to maybe somehow contributed to the suicide, either through what they did or what they didn't do. I mean, that may be justly or unjustly, but often there's the emotion around that. Often there's guilt, and that might be a sense of failed responsibility, whether that's real or imagined. It's hard to know in that particular case, but often that's an emotion that's going around. People often feel isolated because of a self-imposed sense of shame often, but also lonely because people perhaps sometimes avoid them or talking about it because they don't know what to say. And so there's that awkwardness as well, where people don't know how to respond in that social situation. So they can feel ostracized, lonely because they're not having the interactions anymore because people are avoiding them because they don't know what to do. And often this can escalate and people feel very alone during these times.
And again, is that tied to the taboo of conversation around suicide, and that we get so tight just from the word itself that we don't know how to talk to other people?
Yeah. I mean, there's powerful grief reactions that we're talking about here because, often it's the case that trying to make sense of what has happened, either through piecing together what that person told us about their life or what they left behind, or through going through a coronial process where, there's an investigation. Often people are left with a sense of not knowing why something like this has happened, and it feels senseless. And often there's no easy solution to that. It's one of the things that is perhaps a lasting legacy for many people of a struggle to understand why this has happened. And that's something that they perhaps need to talk about quite seriously around what they're left with and how they process that.
And just to make it clear, these things you're talking about, they're normal responses.
Yeah, they are normal responses, but they can feel really abnormal at the time. People really struggle to make sense of the strength of their feelings, the sharpness of the pain that they experience, the anger that they may feel as well. All of this may be happening all at the same time as well for friends, family, and wider community. So it's incredibly complex, and it's really important to make sure that you get professional help when your community or your family is going through this. You'll be able to cope with some of that by yourself, but don't be afraid to reach out, because there are services out there who are specifically geared to assist in these situations, because unfortunately they do happen. And so we need to be prepared and understand that we may need to get help in those situations.
And for those of our listeners who immediately are curious what they are, we will have a list on the page of services as well. With that in mind, Sarb, healing, coming to terms, coming out of that period. What are things that can happen to help this?
Yeah, so one of the things that can happen is thinking about what sort of memorials you might wish to think about, what sort of rituals your family, your friends, your community may need to go through or participate in order to understand or mark or commemorate the passing of this person. And psychotherapists talk about two of the things that we might need to do when something serious like this happens in our lives is we want to try to repair some of the ruptures that occur in our communities and our families and our friends as we try to make sense of this, but also trying to repeat some of the good things that happen. So we have a chance to remember the person who is no longer with us, who has passed away, who has suicided, in ways that does tribute to the good things that they've done, the good memories that we have. So trying to do all of that at the same time as trying to also understand why. You can understand it's a really complex thing that people are trying to negotiate. And so it's a long process. But people do travel down this road and get to a place where they start to be able to live with this rather than necessarily getting any resolution. That's not guaranteed. But people are able to then start live with this process of this event in their lives.
I want to pick up on that word complications, because one of the emotions that you often hear is anger, and then guilt about that anger. Or, what can people do in terms of processing when anger comes up in their grieving process?
Yeah. Well, I guess one of the things is to make sure that you and others around you are safe. So if you're feeling overwhelmed by anger, so making sure that you have a place where you can process that in a way that's safe for you and those people who are around you as well, because often the anger will come along in close proximity to that guilt, to that shame, and all of this is coming out all at the same time or very, very close to each other. It's not abnormal to be experiencing really complex, strong emotions at a time like this, but making sure that you and your loved ones and your family are safe is really critical at a time like this. So make sure that you reach out for help if you do feel like you're experiencing and struggling with those emotions.
Clinical psychologist Sarb Johal, thank you very much for, I think it's a pretty important and unfortunately pertinent discussion.
Kia ora, James.
Kia ora.